Greetings and welcome to a special episode of Morrowind Showcases. Today we'll be taking a look at the massive new release by Skyrim Home of the Nords, adding a large chunk of the reach of Western Skyrim to the game world of Morrowind. This is technically still a beta release. Not all the new quests and factions that are going to be included in this region have been added in yet, though you can, still play through a number of quests and dungeons in this release today. And anyway, for this showcase, we'll be taking a tour over some of the new sites and locations that you'll get to visit in Skyrim Home of the Nords, including the city of Karthwasten and the village of Karthgad, as well as a number of smaller ruins and villages and, things of that nature. We'll also be showing off some of the fantastic new assets and items that you'll get to find in Skyrim, and just a few of the numerous dungeons that you'll get to explore in this release. Now, since this is probably going to be a longer video, you'll naturally find timestamps for each segment of this video down in the video description below, as well as download links for this new release of Skyrim Home of the Nords, and a link to Project Tamriel in case, you want to join the team and help out yourself with this amazing project. But anyway, starting out with the showcase here, we're going to be starting at the Karthwasten docks, which is sort of a satellite settlement of Karthwasten along the Karth River here. And this river is one of the main channels of transportation and commerce in the Reach, connecting Karthwasten to Karthgad, Markarth, and even Hafengard to the north. In any event, this is the first location that you'll get to see as part of this release of Skyrim Home of the Nords. There's an NPC in Ebonheart's Skyrim mission that'll teleport you here. And the docks here is actually kind of a central location in this portion of the Reach. From here you can take the road to both Karthgad or Karthwasten, or, climb up to the Dwardak Highlands and explore ancient Durini ruins. Now, in total, this new release of Skyrim Home of the Nords comes with over 200 new exterior cells for you to explore, as well as hundreds of interiors, including dozens of dungeons, and about half a dozen quests that have already been implemented. Plus, lots of new books to read and NPC dialogue that goes into the rich lore of the Reach. But, we'll get to more of that later on in this video. For now, you may notice that this area around Karthwasten especially looks a bit different from the trailers and interviews that we've hosted on the channel before. Most of the trailers that we've produced for Skyrim Home of the Nords over the past year, including the release trailer that we did earlier, was made of an older build of the Karthwasten region, and you'll find that the city has been largely overhauled and detailed since then. A lot of the buildings that used to be in the middle of the city have been moved to the outskirts to give a more, sort of natural and organic feeling here, with outlying settlements and farmsteads providing support for the city itself. Of course, there's also a lot of burned out husks, destroyed walls, and, ruins around the city of Karthwasten as well, which are basically holdovers from the War of Bendar Mark in 3E398, which, is basically a major war between Skyrim and Hammerfall, when Karthwasten was actually, kind of under siege for a while. Technically speaking, Karthwasten is actually a Redguard city that Skyrim stole from Hammerfall, which is why the architecture here is a bit different from other locations in the Reach, and has more in common with Dragonstar than, Nordic cities like Markarth. And anyway, going into the city itself here, Karthwasten has gone through a lot of changes since we last saw it in the various trailers on the channel. Gone are the generally squarish look and design it had before, replaced with a more organic city design that has a bit of verticality in the design that, lends a sort of epic feel when you first walk through the gates here. This is actually the third or fourth iteration of Karthwasten, and probably the smallest version of the city to date. Originally, Karthwasten was a city of over 100 buildings, then it was narrowed down to about 85, and I think now it's still about around the 80 mark. But again, some buildings have just been removed to the outskirts or outlying settlements. And anyway, we're going to start our tour through Karthwasten in the Palace District, which is of course dominated by the Karthwasten Palace, where normally a Jarl would hold court, except in the case of Karthwasten. Jarla Yona currently holds court in Dragonstar, since she's technically in charge of both cities, but right now I think Thanes are actually the ones in charge of Karthwasten at the moment. There's some dialogue here that sort of, explains Karthwasten's unique situation with regards to leadership. But regardless, Karthwasten is a remarkably detailed and beautiful looking city that's fully fleshed out and, feels, well, kind of lived in. And there's a lot to see and explore here, from back alleys to side streets, open square markets, and numerous shops, taverns, and inns. Karthwasten really does have a little bit of everything, as you should expect from a major merchant hub along the Skyrim and Hammerfall border. You'll see wares from both provinces, as well as the occasional Reachman items available for sale in the market stalls here. And speaking of the marketplace, That's one of, Karthwasten's big features. And you'll note that this part of town has been largely changed since the trailers that we did a while back. I know, I keep referencing our old trailers, but it really does, give you an idea of what this area looked like before. The marketplace used to be a sort of open square with a hangman's noose in the corner, but now it's a bit more, dynamic and divided up, with the actual market moved to an interior space, with just a few outdoor stalls remaining, clustered around the numerous shops, apothecaries and smithies that line the streets here. Now, sort of moving on, right off the market district here, you'll find a couple of small alleys that'll lead you into the lower class quarters of town, where a number of smaller and more rundown buildings sort of just run into one another here. Eventually, this will bring you to a bunch of smaller Nordic-style homes that are, I would say somewhat similar to the Nordic homes that you know from Morrowind, with small little yards and farm animals running amok everywhere. The level detailing here is really just, quite fantastic, and you can certainly tell that the level of upkeep in this district is certainly much less than the rest of the city here, and in any event, Karthwasten is a truly massive city to explore, easily surpassing pretty much all the cities in Vanilla Morrowind, except for, of course, Vivek, coming in at about twice the size of Balmora. Though having said that, future cities like Dragonstar and Markarth are probably going to, be a bit smaller and a bit closer in size to towns like Aldrun and Sadrithmora. But anyway, I have one last section of Karthwasten to show off here before, we move on to looking at interiors, and that's the farming district, where you'll find fields, livestock, and windmills safely within the confines of Karthwasten's mighty stone walls and barricades, so that even during a siege, the city is not without a food supply, which is a rather important aspect given how conflict-heavy this part of the Reach is. Now, we're going to move on to look at some interiors here, and we're going to start out with one of my personal favourite locations in Karthwasten, this rather messy mead hall here, home to a rather unsavoury group known as the Boar Snout Clan, and this mead hall is technically outside Karthwasten city limits, and the locals really don't like the Boar Snouts at all. You'll find plenty of dialogue referring to them as rude, drunk, craven outcasts, but regardless, this interior is fantastically designed, and really gives you an idea of some of the new items and assets that you can expect to find in Skyrim Home of the Nords. Needless to say, you won't find a whole lot of familiar items from Morrowind here. Almost everything in these interiors is new, as you should expect from visiting a new province like this. Taking a look at another interior here, I think this one is a large manor house, or possibly one of the taverns in town. I honestly can't remember which, but regardless, you can see some different furniture and items in here. And of course, most of the NPCs have new dialogue relating to the Reach and Karthwasten in particular. The Red Guards even have their own, term referring to Outlanders. They'll call you a Nudri, or Outsider. And of course, they also have some dialogue complaining about those annoying Boar Snout clan members. And anyway, a lot of these buildings will also have a map of the Reach in them, which is a pretty handy guide for getting an idea of what this region looks like in Skyrim Home of the Nords. And likewise, there's a ton of new books in pretty much every building that we're going to be visiting today, but we'll be covering more of that later on. Now, next up, we're going to be stopping by to take a quick look at the Karthwasten Palace. We won't be, looking at every room in here, but I did just want to take a quick tour of the throne room and the kitchens. Naturally, we're going to be starting out in the throne room here, which is a lovely and large open-air space, with, platforms above where people can watch the Jarl make decrees or whatnot. Or in the case of Karthwasten, the Thanes, since again the Jarl is actually in Dragonstar at the moment. There's also a large set of kitchens here, which gives us a pretty good opportunity to check out some of the new ingredients and food stuff that you'll find in the Reach, including chicken, fish, and, other somewhat normal Imperial-style goods. Now, I did just want to take a quick look at one of the royal bedrooms in the palace, because the design here is pretty cool. The bed is actually in an alcove in the wall here, and there's also a bathing chamber, and, this really just gives you an idea of some of the interesting and unique architecture and finishings that you're going to find in the Reach. Taking a look at another rather large room here, this is a sort of divided off gathering hall with drinks and various places for guests to wait at. And one of the things that you're going to notice in here is the rather stylish furniture and finishings. The chairs here are a bit lower to the ground than their Imperial counterparts, and there's some especially lavish cabinets and chests lining the walls here. You'll also find some rather nice looking tables, benches and bookshelves in here as well. And of course, all this is essentially upper class furniture. You won't find a lot of this stuff in lower class homes. I know I keep rambling on about the furnishings in here, But you really do have to appreciate the superb art direction and design of the Skyrim Home of the Nords team with regards to all these amazing assets and atmospheric interiors. And anyway, moving on, we're going to take a look at a slightly more lower to middle class interior, and that's one of the common taverns you'll find in Karthwasten. This is actually a Red Guard run establishment, a holdover from, back when Karthwasten was a Red Guard city. And again, I just have to say that the sheer excellence of Skyrim Home of the Nords interior design really shines through here. This tavern feels, pretty well lived in, with a drinking area in the middle, where patrons can gather, 2 bars for serving guests, and of course a kitchen in the back as you'd expect. We're going to be taking a look at just a few more interiors here, because however many we're looking at today, trust me, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to everything else that you'll get to see in Karthwasten. We're looking at maybe 8 or 9 interiors out of a city of over 80 interiors, so no worries, there's plenty worth skipping over here that you'll just have to find for yourself. In any event, this is the Imperial Cult Chapel in Karthwasten. It's a sort of a common chapel of the Divines, I think. It's not really dedicated to any one of the 9, as far as I'm aware. The NPCs here, of course, have some new dialogue, including a hint towards a possible new quest that may not have been implemented yet. But we're not going to linger here. Instead, just real quick, I wanted to show off some of the lower class homes that you'll find, because obviously the clutter and finishings of these small cottages is going to be quite different from the upper class and merchant areas of the city. You'll notice there's a lot less in the way of solid furniture in these homes, with beds more likely to be made out of sleeping mats that consist of straw and animal fur and things of that nature, rather than, actual elevated beds. And there's really not much furniture at all in these abodes, probably because furniture is expensive and these NPCs can only afford small items. There are a few exceptions, of course, but they're pretty far in between, and either way, the detailing and clutter work here is just simply excellent, I have to say. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to show you guys in Karthwasten. The city is certainly a big and detailed place, and you'll just have to explore it for yourself to see all the truly amazing things that I saw of it. And we're now going to be moving to the outskirts of Karthwasten and take a look at some of the landscapes and other settlements that you'll find as part of this first major release by the Skyrim Home of the Nords team. And first up, we're going to be stopping by one of the major manors outside of town, which is divided off from Karthwasten by a small canyon. And this is home to one of the more wealthy residents of the city. And it's sort of a massive manor compound, including a guardhouse, walls, and gardens all on its own. But we have a lot of areas to look at in this showcase, so we're just going to quickly move on. So we're going to go to our next location here, which is taking a look at some of the landscapes around Karthwasten itself. If you travel around the city, you'll notice that Karthwasten kind of sits on an outcropping, divided off from the surrounding landscape by canyons on multiple sides, making it a fairly easily defended location, a rather important consideration given the number of wars and conflicts this region sees on a regular basis. Now, one of the things I absolutely love about Skyrim Home of the Nords is the quite simply amazing diversity of the landscape, with multiple terrain heights, cliff faces, canyons, ravines, small fields and forests. The landscape here is just, so much more dynamic than, what you're used to back in good old Morrowind, with these dramatic changes in terrain, from mesas to mountains, adding a sort of epic sense of wonder as you explore this beautiful landmass. There's really just no place like this in Morrowind. And that just kind of hits home the fact that, yes, you're in a different province, where the geography is, of course, going to be quite different and unique from what you've seen before. And real quick, we're going to stop by a border outpost just up the road from Karthwasten, and this more or less marks the end of Skyrim's domain. And the road from here goes on into Hammerfall, with just a couple of wooden palisades, gates and towers, noting where the official border stands. Given the close proximity to Karthwasten, you can easily imagine how this was all, part of Hammerfall at one point in time. And of course, since Hammerfall does have Dwemer ruins, you will see a few of those familiar Dwemer towers in the distance, so keep in mind. These might be placeholders for now. The border area hasn't really, been finalized yet, and this is all subject to change. And regardless though, it is a lovely area, and it's certainly quite scenic. Anyway, we're going to move on to another region of the Reach, the Dwardak Highlands, and I apologise, I'm still not entirely sure how to pronounce that. But anyway, a large portion of the Dwardak Highlands, particularly off towards the city of Dragonstar, is still, sort of unfinished and not included in this release. So I'm actually going to be looking at these border messes here that stand in between the provinces of Skyrim and Hammerfall, and getting to the top of these messes is no easy task. The road going up here quickly becomes a bunch of, just random rocks and old stairways carved into the cliff face. It'll take you to the top, no need for levitation, but you'll want to, watch your step on the way. Now, there's actually quite a few small villages and isolated farmsteads up here, a small remote outpost of civilization, though many of these are owned by the local Reachmen, a fiercely independent culture that's been fighting to, survive against Red Guard and Nordic occupation for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And you can see one of these Reachmen's villages here, and you notice that they have a rather distinctive architectural style, with tall thatched roofs made up of local materials like straw and mud, as well as some wood in the construction. And again, I feel like I just have to point out the beautiful level of detail here. This village feels like a lived-in sort of place with small gardens and animals and, the other odds and ends of a living community. I know I said this already, but the art direction here, with new and unique cultural items for the Reachmen here, is just absolutely fantastic, and while the Reachmen themselves may not welcome outsiders, you'll definitely want to explore their villages for yourself when you visit the Reach, because there's just so much cool stuff to find here. Moving on to our next landmark here, we're stopping by one of the ancient Durini fortresses that stands tall along the border here. The Durini were a rather powerful group that controlled much of this region, spanning both into High Rock and Hammerfall, thousands of years ago, and their fortresses still stand today. Ancient relics left behind from a time of political upheaval, victims of the Reach's constant turmoil. And that said, there's something magical and majestic about the architecture of these ancient ruins, and you'll find a number of outposts and fortresses of a Durini origin as you explore the Reach, though I believe this is the only completed fortress in the current release from Skyrim Home of the Nords. We'll be taking a look at the new dungeon and tier tile set for this later on, but for now we're going to, just go around the exterior here. There's a lot of just amazing detailing out here, and you'll notice that the ruins are a bit overgrown. They clearly haven't seen much human activity in a while, and several of these walls and bridges are in various states of disrepair. But anyway, we're going to be looking at just one more part of the Dordak Highlands here before we move on to the Vorndigad Forest, and that's another settlement. This one is a mixed Reachman and Nordic village that's clearly seen better days. It still bears the scars of the most recent conflict, and also potentially the genocidal actions of a certain Jarla Yona, who's been known to go around the countryside burning down Reachman and Red Guard villages every once in a while. In any event, I believe this village is still technically inhabited, even if it's seen better days. Unlike some of the other numerous burnt down ruins and destroyed villages that you'll find all over the Dordak Highlands. Obviously though, this area is still a bit in development, hence the lack of NPCs here. So next we're going to be heading towards the center, the new lands included in this release, the Vorndigad Forest. So just jumping back to where we started at, we're going to follow the road out of Karthwasten, past the Karthwasten docks and into the Vorndigad Forest, which you can see in the distance here. The Vorndigad Forest is cut off from the city here by the Karth River, which provides a natural barrier between regions, and generally speaking, most of the forest is fairly low-lying, with a few scattered hills and outcroppings that are dwarfed by the nearby border mesas of the Dordak Highlands. Having said that though, the Vorndigad Forest is quite scenic, with a thick tree line with an undergrowth of bushes, ferns, and beautiful wildflowers making for some lovely treks through the woods. Though you should always be careful because, as this caravan found out, there's always danger lurking in the Vorndigad Forest, and more than a few bandits that you'll have to deal with. And this actually brings us to one of the first quests that you'll come across as part of this new release of Skyrim Home of the Nords, which includes a fair bit of dialogue explaining that this caravan's horse has run away during a bandit attack, and they need your help to track it down. But just moving past that, the path here heading through the Vorndigad Forest closely follows the Karth River, and of course it eventually leads to the other major settlement in this release, the small village of Karthgad, which you can just barely, see here poking out from the trees in the distance. Eventually the path crosses the Karth River at a shallow water pot, and you'll notice there's several of these low water crossings where the road crosses the river, with nothing but these guideposts to keep people from, washing away. And that's just, part of the rustic charm of the Reach here, if I say so myself. And anyway, we're coming up on Karthgad here, and you can see a small set of docks here where you can probably get transportation back to Karthwasten, or even up to Markarth, provided you don't mind paying a fee, of course. And in any event, Karthgad is best recognised by its iconic rustic and makeshift watchtowers that look over the surrounding forest. Karthwasten itself is built on a raised outcropping, giving it a defensive advantage, and an excellent sightline on the river and woodlands here, so the townsfolk can see invaders from a far-off distance. You'll notice a lot of details like this in Skyrim Home of the Nords. Settlements and cities are often built on geographically strategic terrain, a reflection of the conflict-heavy status of the Reach. But going into the town of Karthwasten here, you'll notice the architecture is quite different from that found elsewhere in the Reach. This is a sort of more, traditional Nordic architecture, taking full advantage of the large Vortigern forest to build wooden cabin-like frames, which also usually includes stone foundations. But I've probably, talked enough about the architecture here. The culture of Karthwasten is also rather interesting. Like many groups in the Reach, they're really not too fond of outsiders, especially Red Guards, which they see as kind of being historic enemies, and Reachmen, which they kind of regard as inferior. And indeed, you'll find a fairly cold reception in this village of hunters, loggers, and warriors, where the seat of power is unquestionably the Babb clan who control Karthwasten, from their large mead hall in the middle of town. That said, there are a couple of shops here, including a trader and a smithy, so you'll find a few services available, though there's no inns or taverns for travelers. The people here are, rather isolationist, and are rather keen to keep outsiders moving on. They don't really want you staying any longer than necessary. And if you're thinking to yourself that, in a way, this is awfully similar to the hostile cultures of Morrowind, well, you're not entirely wrong. The Reach is a bit similar to Morrowind in their shared dislike of outsiders. And anyway, we're going to stop by a few more interiors here again, just to give you an idea of what these Nordic homes look like. Unsurprisingly, a lot of these homes are a bit messy, as Nords are a rather messy people. It's not racist if it's true. I mean, just look at this place, and this is supposed to be a smithy, for heaven's sake. But moving on, let's take a look at another interior here. This surrounds the Babb clan mead hall, which again is kind of messy with a lot of bottles, mugs, and tankards. But it is a mead hall, so I guess that's to be expected to a certain degree. And this is where you'll find a lot of the Babb clan members in town, as well as the chieftain, the sort of political leader of Karthwasten. Now, I'm honestly not sure if this interior has, actually changed much since the original Vortigern Alpha back in 2011. And indeed, I think most of Karthwasten was already complete at that point, and already had interiors, so a lot of this may be familiar to what you've played already if you played the original Alpha back in 2011. But either way, these interiors certainly have a Nordic feel about them, and I'm not just, talking about the messy state here. And anyway, before we move on, we're going to take a quick look at the general trader in town, which is a bit nicer looking, but the owners also aren't Nords. So, make of that what you will. Regardless, this is the only place where you can stock up on common goods between Karthwasten and Markarth, really. Aside from, various traveling traders here and there. So if you need health potions or a new blade, this is a good place to stop in at. Now, we're almost done with our tour of the Reach. We just have one more location to stop by, since Skyrim Home of the Nords is, obviously a very different interpretation of Skyrim from the one found in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. It's worth showing off one of the features they both have in common, and that's those iconic and massive barrows that you found on so many mountaintops in the Elder Scrolls V. You'll still find some of these here. They're not as prominent in the Reach as they are in Eastern Skyrim, something you'll just have to, wait and see in future releases. And anyway, that about does it for our tour of the Reach. We're next going to be taking a look at some of the dungeons that you'll find. Though we'll only be showing off a small part of each type of dungeon that you'll encounter in the Reach, because again, I want to avoid spoilers, naturally. But we're going to start things out with a Durini dungeon, because this is by far one of the coolest new additions in Skyrim Home of the Nords, including an all-new tile set, tons of new artifacts, furniture, and other various details. These ruins are mostly underground, as you might expect, with animated gates dividing off various areas, and these dungeons are quite atmospheric, I have to say, especially with the low sort of greenish lighting in here. There's still a few working light sources down here. These are powered, I think, mostly by some sort of magical crystal. Rorik and Warsaz went into some detail about how these ruins work in our interview from last year. But anyway, one of my favorite additions here is the new Durini artifacts. I don't know about you guys, but collecting ancient Duma items was one of my all-time favorite activities back in Morrowind, and it's so cool to see a whole new set of ancient artifacts to collect in Skyrim Home of the Nords, including the familiar Vulcan stones. You'll find everything from ancient coins to dishware and numerous other items should you carefully explore these Durini ruins. But getting back to the dungeon here, this Durini ruin is quite massive and somewhat maze-like. You'll easily get lost down here, and there's probably a couple hours worth of content just in this one ruin. But again, to avoid spoiling things, we're just, going to move on to our next dungeon. And aside from Durini Ruins, you also find a ton of caverns in the Reach, which range from natural caverns like this one to bandit hideouts, smugglers, and ancient ruins, lost in the dirt and stone from ages past. Unlike the Caves of Morrowind, the ones you'll find here in the Reach are often close-quartered, dark, and difficult to navigate, really. Chances are, if you go cave delving in Skyrim, you're bound to get lost eventually, though you won't be alone in these caves. Often you'll find spike worms, a new type of creature exclusive to the Reach, but the more you explore, you may find yet more dangerous and difficult fights ahead of you. I'd also like to point out the mushrooms in here. They bear some similarities to mushrooms of the Bitter Coast region, but you'll only find these rust-colored mushrooms in the depths of Skyrim's caves, and in any event, while many of these caverns are relatively empty of loot, being natural caverns and not necessarily hideouts for bandits, you might still discover some rare treasures or, tragic misfortunes in these depths, with some documents left behind by their previous owners. And just moving on, there's one other dungeon type that you'll discover in the Reach, and that's obviously Nordic burial sites, and these barrows bear some similarities to the ones you find on Solstheim, or even in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim for that matter. Of course, there's some differences here, and you'll find a variety of new items and assets lining the burial chambers here, including new enemies that utilize the original Blood Moon designs, but with new weapons and armor. Anyway, this has been a quick look at the dungeons of the Reach. There's about 24 or so dungeons included in this release from Skyrim Home of the Nords, with over a dozen hours of content at the very least, so you have plenty to look forward to and check out for yourself. Now, next up, we're going to be taking a look at some of the new items included in Skyrim Home of the Nords, which range from new complete armor sets to weapons, ingredients, food items, books, and various other miscellaneous items. We're going to start out by taking a look at some of the new armors found in the Reach, including this Nordic God armor that we're looking at here. This is a sort of combined chainmail and plate armor, and you'll notice it seems pretty highly detailed. Taking a look at another armor set here. This is a mix of Nordic steel and Nordic ringmail armor, though you'll notice a lot of it appears to be made up of cloth or some other fabric. Either way, it's an interesting looking style, and it certainly makes for a nice addition to your armory. And here's another rather curious armor set. I believe this one is actually leather, and it's made from one of the more, unique creatures found in the Reach. I believe they're called worm mouse, or something like that anyway. It's a bit more, plain than the other armor sets, but it's also probably warmer for fighting in colder climates. And now, in addition to armor, Skyrim Home of the Nords includes a ton of new clothing. Everything from lower class to rich merchant styles has been made especially for this project, and the clothing options here do seem to be a bit more colorful than the standard fabrics found back in Morrowind. And here's some Red Guard peasant garbs. They're somewhat similar to the lower class clothing you see in poor Dunmiri villages back in Morrowind. And here's a slightly more middle class style with some rich blues on the fabric here. And you'll notice that all the clothing in Skyrim Home of the Nords appears to be, pretty high resolution and detailed. Again, the art direction and design for this project is simply amazing. And, I'm simply in awe of everything the team has accomplished here. And moving on to some of the other items, we're going to stop by an alchemist shop to see a few potions and ingredients are included in Skyrim Home of the Nords. And you'll notice that, yes, the potions in Skyrim look different from the potions that are found in Morrowind. Almost everything here is new. And there's also a number of new ingredients used in alchemy, as well as a variety of flasks, bottles, chests, and, other various odds and ends. Now, I've gathered just a few of the new items included in Skyrim Home of the Nords here on one of the upper balconies in Karthwasten, and you can see just some of the new dishes, booze, food items, including, by the way, sweet rolls, pots, flasks, and cups that can be found in this release. And, of course, all of this is already included in the Tamriel data package as well, and from what I understand, that's open to all modders for their own personal use. And I just have to say, there is just an incredible variety of items included here, and we won't be looking at even a fraction of them in this video. We've largely skipped over the new amulets and rings, let alone all the different artifacts and cultural items of the Reach. There's just a ton here to see and collect for yourself. And of course, that's not all. There's also the new books I mentioned earlier, and there's dozens of new texts, documents, histories, cultural studies, and more for you to sink your teeth into. Most of these were written by Lord Brandis, and if you're a literature fan like myself, they give you a great glimpse into the cultures and societies of the Reach. Now, Skyrim Home of the Nords is a massive modding project, and we've just barely scratched the surface of everything you'll find in this new release, but we've come to the end of our showcase here. You'll find download links for Skyrim Home of the Nords, as well as project links for Project Tamriel down in the video description below, and I highly recommend you give this mod a try. And anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.